Hi everyone, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks, and today I'm going to be asking the question, does the AMX M4 suck? And today I'm going to be showing you two games where I'm playing on my Plays for Free account, and that's a big factor here, and that is because I think the AMX M4 is actually one of the better heavy tanks for a free-to-play player who doesn't want to just be spamming gold left, right, and center. Now, you should still fire a few gold rounds in this vehicle, but one of the interesting things about this tank is that the 120mm has a really, really good standard penetration, a bit like on the Panzer 7, which is why one of the Panzer 7s is one of the best performing heavy tanks in the game at tier 10. That's got 276mm on its standard pen, and this vehicle, if you elect to use the stock gun, the 120mm, you have 270mm of AP pen. This is higher than a lot of the other tier 10 heavy tanks, and it means that you just go through targets that otherwise others kind of would struggle with. You'd be amazed in World of Tanks at how many armor plates are kind of balanced out at around the 250mm mark and then the 300mm mark. And that is because that's the kind of like the AP pen, and then should I say the regular pen, and then kind of like the gold pen on most tier 10 tanks, where most tier 10s have got about between 300 and 340. That goes through things like the Jagdpanzer E100, for example, whereas the AP shells on something like a mouse, you kind of got like a 50-50 to bounce off even the weak points of a mouse within that regard. So, the M4, a choice of which gun should you use on this tank. Now, it does have a 130mm gun available, and if you use the 130mm gun, your alpha damage increases massively. It increases from 400 up to 560. Your DPM stays the same, so a lot of you'll be saying, well, the obvious choice is to just go for the gun with the higher alpha and the same DPM, right? Well, yes and no. Sure, you're going to be able to make those better trades with regards to the alpha damage, but you have to make big sacrifices in a lot of other areas. Your aim time goes up by 0.7 seconds, and so now you're definitely going to be wanting to take vert stabs on the vehicle, which will mean you'll have to sacrifice something like a durability, or either the turbo or the vents on this vehicle. Also, the accuracy on this vehicle goes from 0.36, or should I say from 0.33 to 0.36 if you use the larger gun, but the real big one is the turret traverse dispersion. And it's interesting because when Wargaming buffed this vehicle, they made the big gun insane. I think it was probably one of the most overpowered tanks tier for tier in the game for a little while. A bit like when Wargaming buffed the weak point of the T110E5, and you really needed to fire gold to have any chance of going through that T110E5 weak point. Wargaming eventually nerfed the T110E5, and they did exactly the same to this tank. I think they had to lower its health again. They made its dispersion when turning the turret massively worse. I think they nuked its accuracy and a little bit of its rate of fire on that bigger gun. It was clearly a case of just take the big gun and job done before Wargaming nerfed. The only nerfed 130mm. And so that 130mm, they nerfed the turret traverse dispersion. So now the difference between the 120 and the 130 is going from 0.08 to 0.14. That is kind of the realms of where I would kind of like start to drop snapshot and consider that I don't need to use vert stabs on a vehicle. However, I would like to say this vehicle doesn't have great movement dispersion, irrelevant of what gun you use. The gun doesn't change. It's only the turret traverse dispersion that changes. And so with the 120, you can kind of get away without using vert stabs on this vehicle and invest that equipment into other areas that maybe you feel like you will benefit a little bit more. Whereas with the 130, you should definitely be using vert stabs because of that horrible turret traverse dispersion, that horrible aim time. So this is just what's great about this gun. We're just going to be fighting against IS-4, and against this tank, it's kind of like just load the gold or get out most of the time. But these great standard AP rounds, and remember, AP is way better than APCR for engaging angled surfaces if the penetrations are comparable. The difference between AP and APCR is usually about 30mm of effective armor if you're shooting at a surface that is angled by more than 2 degrees. And so, for example, an AP round with 270 will be the equivalent of constantly firing APCR rounds with 300 if you're shooting at angled surfaces. Roughly, give or take. And that's just because of the 5 degrees of normalization compared to the 2 degrees of normalization. So, for example, this tank, talk about gold rounds. Man, that Jaeger just went straight through my mantler. I've got a new googly eye on the front of my vehicle, and suddenly things aren't looking so chipper for me, after I thought this was going really well at 3,900 combined without really taking too much of a shot. So really what this tank has is... It's kind of as if it's firing only gold with an IS-7 with the AP rounds on this tank. It's got about like 300 millimeters of APCR pen on its standard rounds. Now, of course, you will have a little bit worse shell velocity, but when you're engaging at close quarters combat, does that really matter? Now, the gold rounds on this tank have 315 millimeters of pen, so that means that they will still be better. They will be kind of like that 10 millimeters better. And so for when I absolutely, utterly needed to get through that Jagdpanzer, I felt the need to load the gold. But still, up until this point, we've done like 3,000 damage, or it's probably about 2,600, without just whiffing the gold rounds like you see me doing now. And I'm trying to get this IS-4 to just actually have a shot at me, trying to hit his driver's hatch here. And unfortunately, even the gold rounds on this tank bouncing off that driver's hatch. But hopefully if the artillery keeps the stunning going, if I can get this guy to just take a shot at me, then maybe I'll be able to go to town on his lower plate. And there we go. He exposes himself. The artillery luckily misses us, so we're going to get forwards. And one of the things I like about this gun is that the 130 wouldn't have killed him there most of the time. But to have this better rate of fire, it just allows me to kind of get these control engagements going, a bit like in a T110E5. Although I'd like to stress this vehicle doesn't have T110 E5 rate of fire. And if you want to play something with wild DPM, you're still best to play a T110 E5. I'd say this vehicle, compared to a T110 E5, I'd say the T110 E5 actually has the better side armor and the better side profile. This thing from the side is absolutely horrendous. But if you can manage to keep your opponents in front of you, I think the M454 is just an absolute solid grinder of a tank. And it's also quite good for players who are not so confident with angling or side scraping, because as soon as you side scrape on this tank, the side point becomes a bit of a weakness. So when you side scrape, you actually almost have to go like this and then try and bait them into shooting the wings and then turn a little bit more. Let me clarify, if you go around the corner like this, they'll see your lower plate before you manage to have their gun, which is why a lot of people would want to do this, but then you make that weak point, well, you make the side angle a weak point for knowledgeable players. So I'm really happy with my heads-up play to be able to get back towards the base here. And that means that we catch the autoloader, 2 autoloaders, with some spotting from the artillery before they manage to get the side of that Rinoceronte. And if they had, this game would have been a lot more tense. But luckily, finishing off those 2 tanks, getting back, now means that we've got ourselves a nice, honest Top Gun with 5,300 combined and 6 kills. Happy about this free-to-play. This is what it's all about on the free-to-play account. Playing without those crazy advantages. Although you might be looking at my equipment and going, well, you've got Bond equipment. Well, the reason why I've got Bond equipment on this tank is that for a while in one of the Onslaught seasons, when this thing was buffed, it was the best tank to play. And so I put my best equipment on this to kind of like cheese some easy wins in Onslaught, as you should do. If you don't enjoy playing the most competitive game modes like Onslaught, why go against the meta in that way, unless you're a little bit of a hipster, right? So, the M454. I think this thing is an absolute banger for free-to-play players especially. If you're the kind of player who never wants to fire gold, really, you could almost just never fire gold on this tank, and you'd only be putting yourself at a tiny disadvantage. You'd have a disadvantage with regards to your shell velocity, and you'd have maybe like a 10mm disadvantage of effective penetration against angled surfaces. However, against flat surfaces of 2 degrees and less, yeah, those APCR rounds are going to be just way better than the AP, because then you lose all of that normalization advantage. So round 2, and I believe this game was from the day after, and it's kind of going to be a similar thing with the M454. We're going to be in a tricky scenario, but this time I've elected to use the turbo instead of using the durability device on this tank, because on that previous map, I do feel like it's a crunch engagement, and that's the big difference between whether I take a turbo or I take a durability on a vehicle. If I feel like the game is going to be decided in one area of the map, and it kind of doesn't matter how quickly I get there, then the durability is going to help me to be able to win that engagement. And also if I need to side scrape as well, right? Small maps or maps where the game is won and lost in a single position. However, on this map, I feel like the game is definitely not won and lost in a single position. This is going to be about flowing and getting at our opponents and progressing as much of the map as possible. So, unfortunately, we miss a couple of shots there against the VZ55. But job done, right? We've caught him And now we're going to use that turbo to see if we can be able to catch this 60 TP before they escape, because if they get to the other side of the bridge, it's going to be rough. So there's just that wonderful 60 TP lower plate armor just baiting the 60 TP into, did I say wonderful 60 TP lower plate armor? M454 lower plate armor. But I tell you what, the 60 TP has very good lower plate armor as well. I'm sure a few of you have been bouncing some rounds off that in frustrating fashion. But yeah, the M454, the lower plate on this tank is actually very troll indeed. So in this kind of a situation, you have to make a decision. Pushing over the open here is only something you can do if you think you do it quickly and you have enough speed to be able to do so. And I think with that Bond turbo, I'm going to have enough power to weight. This thing has a great power to weight ratio of 17 base, and once you get things like the second field mod to improve your ground resistances, along with the turbo on this tank, yeah, you're bombing it around more like a slower medium. You're definitely not a fast medium, that's for sure. But this thing is surprisingly good at taking positions and going up slope. And I just thought that if I fall back and I wrap around and then I go the way that the E100 and the Progetto are going, I'm still going to get nuked by the tank destroyers. Whereas if I take the corner and I don't get caught, that might allow me to A, get rid of the 2 self-propelled guns on the enemy team, and B, start to develop a crossfire. Because while the M454 would have done pretty good against this E4, if I'm sitting in that position and an FP405, for example, over here or up on the hill, or the Ho-Ri decides to nuke me, they are going to absolutely farm the living daylights out of me. However, that E4 didn't expect the shot from the side. I'm going to let my AP shell fully reload, and then I'm going to intuition switch to an HE here, because I'll have 500 alpha, which allows me to finish off that tank in a single shot. Got AP rounds loading, and oh, hello FP405, who's probably just nuked to Progetto in the side. Well, alright. I guess I don't have time. We're down by 3 tanks. We're even on hit points. Let's see if we can try and get our team back into this game a little bit. 500 alpha damage against that FP405, and I decide I'm going to get nuked in the side, so I'd rather take 1,000 damage in the front. But luckily, the HE shell doesn't do very well against my lower plate, only 300. We follow it up with another HE shell against him, and another HE shell against him. And I'm just praying, will we be able to get another load in here before he manages to reload? Hold that mouse button down. Ooh. Thank goodness. Yeah, 119 damage dealt to the FP405. GG, GG, GG. That's his full tank. And that ramming, it might have helped a little bit. Maybe if we hadn't rammed the FP405, we would have been in a bit of an awkward low roll situation there. And it looks like also the artillery managed to get themselves killed in the middle of the map. So we've just been an absolute death ball towards the enemy base, getting the crossfire on the E4, full healthed an FP405 for only receiving 353 damage. And again, that lower plate, beautiful. If I was in a Super Conqueror there, it looks like he just shot my upper plate, but I think the lower plate would have still tanked him. If I'd been in a Super Conqueror there, I was losing 1,750 damage, that's for sure. If I was in an E5, I think I probably would have still been able to take it. But undoubtedly, this thing has a way better lower plate than an E5 does on most angles. But again, as I said, the E5 just so much better with regards to its side armor. Has like those tricky angled bulge out over the side that makes those tracks good. And oh, darn it, didn't quite manage to catch that test sack. All right, so having fired, I believe, most of our AP and our HE rounds here, we're going to load some gold in this scenario, I guess for the extra shell velocity against those mediums, but also against a Ho-Ri, you need every millimeter of penetration against a Ho-Ri structure. So this Ho-Ri looks like they're using a durability device if they've got 2,200 hit points, so tracking them isn't really an option here. And now I'm just in this horrible scenario where the enemy in the middle are going to stop me from being able to progress, but all I can do is still really hope that I'm not going to just get absolutely slammed in the side. I still feel like the enemy with having a tank up, and for me to be isolated here, I'm not sure if I can trust my center. I do try to communicate with my team to let them know that they spot me from the middle, I can't push, and now this is where heavy tanks versus light tanks and mediums can end up being fairly awkward with trying to get that vision in. So Centurion is now trying to push towards Leopard, and as I see that there's someone in the cap circle, I decide that now's my time to push, because if I don't, then they're just going to slowly gain strength. And we can see the IS-7 is also pushing as well. If the IS-7 is pushing, I've got to try and develop a crossfire with him. So I take some shots as I go across here. I stop for a second because I don't feel like the Tessac has the most meaningful damage. And I can also put him down to a one-shot. And while it looks like I do take a fairly decent amount of damage from the Tessac, they actually take about 300 damage, I do feel like I'd want to trade my hit points evenly with a Tessac in that scenario to put him down to a one-shot for my Leopard, for example. So the Ho-Ri has clearly left the cap circle, and I got to decide, is he running away from me or is he coming towards me? And I make a bit of a misplay there, and he is coming towards me. And right now it's awkward. If I go backwards, okay, now the Tessac's finished off. There we go. The Leopard does finish off the Tessac. Got to put him down to a one-shot. Oh, no, not like this. Okay, Ho-Ri has 700 alpha, so as long as he doesn't high roll here, I should be okay. We put one through his lower plate, and hopefully we're going to ram him for a lot. Only 73, that's still quite a heavy tank. And we're going to have to go through his structure here, because I didn't quite have the gun depression for his upper plate, which was well angled. And now we just got to hope that he doesn't have a good rate of fire, and my 120 comes through, and whew, it does. Thank goodness. So up to 5,500 combined and 5 kills now. And unfortunately, my E100 is locked in Mortal Kombat with the middle of the map. So in this kind of a scenario, what's the play? The Centurion could be looking at me, but if the Centurion's looking at me, there's just nothing that I can really do about that. I have to progress. I have to join this E100, or I have to try and just poke around the corner slowly, see if my Sixth Sense goes off, and if my Sixth Sense doesn't go off, I've probably got to make my way towards the middle of this map. If you just leave your friend in a 2 versus 1, especially against 2 medium tanks like this, then yeah, you're going to end up in a 2 versus 1 yourself, right? And even if he has managed to get them down to a one-shot, we're all one-shots right now. We might as well be playing Counter-Strike with AWPs right now. Although in World of Tanks, you need slightly... There's a few other things that you have to think about rather than just coming around the corner quickly and shooting. Or is there, really? Well, we'll have to find out fairly soon. So, unfortunately, it doesn't look like the E100 had the reactions for the 430U there as he finishes him off. Okay, so in this scenario, what is the play? Do I sit and do I wait? No. What I want to do is I want to try and lock my opponents down from relocating. So, they're probably going to think that I'm sitting over towards where I was last spotted. They probably won't have thought that I've made my way here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to reverse, so I'm not getting spotted in the side, and I'm also going to position myself where I'm not getting proxy spotted, and I want to basically just have a corner shot on someone if they decide to progress through the center. And also, what I need to do is have enough time if they both come to shoot the first and then fall back and be able to reload for the second. And yeah, it's just one of those nervous moments, right? Take a deep breath and kill the Centurion. The perfect ambush. Now I'm thinking, is the 430U going to advance down the slope as well? Yeah, I'm going to just stay hidden until I'm no longer spotted. And then when I'm no longer spotted, I'm going to start to advance again. And I was thinking to myself, the 430U, is he really going to come around the corner now? He'll probably be sitting up in this location. You can see I'm just like zooming out, having a bit of a think about it. I'm also a little bit worried that he might try and come down the slope and flank me. I'm coming around that corner very slowly, expecting that's where the 430U is going to be. He's not, though. So I've got 5 minutes left on the game, and if the 430U has gone elsewhere, it's kind of about hunting right now. Now that he knows where I am, I need to progress the situation and try and hunt him. Because if I stay still, it allows him to flank me, and the 54, as I said, has got really bad side and rear armor. I'm actually really happy that I proxy spot him here, and now I can just like lock up my position. Is he going to try and side scrape me? Oh, I've got a nice shot through there, and wow, he doesn't know how to side scrape. So sucks for you, Mr. 430U, but not for me. With another 7 kills in the M454. So all in all, M454. What do I think about it? Does it suck in World of Tanks now with the nerfs? It doesn't suck. It doesn't suck. It's definitely not in the realms of crazy overpowered like it was last year. But definitely doesn't suck. This vehicle, it's just a contender. It just can just bumble around, surprise its opponents with its lower plate. It has some weak points on top. Those are only noticeable if the vehicle's not using its gun depression. And in this kind of a scenario, it's a fairly imposing tank to try and go for. At this kind of an angle, you can still go for that lower plate. For that kind of like lower plate on this tank, kind of baiting your opponents into making mistakes against it, yeah, it feels good. So 2 ways to play the M454. If you're free to play, definitely use the 120mm. You'll do so much better with it, in my opinion. And then just get rid of things like vert stabs and take advantage of the good aim time and the gun handling of this tank. And invest into other modules on the vehicle. Focus on having that better rate of fire, focus on having that better mobility, or focus on taking that durability so you don't have to worry. On the other hand, if you are someone who has a lot of economy, you can still do well with the 130 as long as you spam gold. And that is because the 130 on this tank actually gets AP as standard. And because it has 296 millimeters of standard AP pen, that is going to be more like the equivalent of having about 320 to 330 of APCR. So those rounds are actually better than the gold rounds on the 120 millimeter, but only if you can afford them. And that's because the standard pen on that 130 millimeter is 250, which is, yeah, really sketchy at tier 10 for reliability compared to the 270 millimeters on the 120. And it honestly kind of surprises me that the AMX M454 with a win rate difference is towards the lower mid of the pack with regards to the tech tree heavy tanks. And I guess with now the Super Conqueror being nerfed, really the all-round recommended pick would probably be the T110E5. If, of course, you want to have some damage per minute. Otherwise, wham bam, thank you, ma'am. Go for that Panzer 7 with that 276 millimeters of standard pen. Anyway, ladies and gents, boys and girls, that was it for today. Really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you hated it, give it a thumbs down. And let me know in the comments down below, do you still love the AMX M454? And which gun do you play it with? And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.